A very good evening and welcome to all of you to this 47th WiseViews leadership conversation on the ICFAI platform. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a hugely distinguished leader with us who is in the social sector, that is Professor Shantha Sinha. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together in welcoming Professor Shantha Sinha. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
We are extremely delighted, honored, and as I introduce you, I'll just take a minute to briefly introduce you. We are quite delighted, not just because we have known you for a longer time, not just because you are one of the recipients of our honoris causa given by ICFAI recently, but more importantly, this is a sector which is less discussed and most of us are keenly interested in understanding it from you. You as a person who has led a lot of programs in rescuing children, in ensuring that their rights are well protected, administered, and there is a clear-cut tangible benefit for children across. So we are delighted for connecting with you for a very important cause. So allow me to share my screen and I'll introduce ma'am. So this is the 47th WiseViews conversation, and we have none other than Professor Shantha Sinha. She's going to talk about the topic from child labor to education, innovations from the pandemic. So broadly, the agenda is about 20 to 25 minutes. Ma'am will talk about the topic, that's the initial remarks, and we'll keep a large portion of our conversation for Q&A. That is going to be about 40 minutes or so. The Q&A will be moderated by my esteemed colleague, Professor Prasad, who is already joined, and myself. So Professor Shantha Sinha is an awardee, Ramon Magsaysay awardee, very prestigious award. And this is a huge recognition to the social cause that she has taken up, that is protection of child labor, protection of child rights in this country. As I mentioned, she is a retired professor. She was with the University of Hyderabad in the Department of Political Science, and formerly the chairperson of National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, NCPCR, the Government of India body. She's also the founder secretary for the trustee of MV Foundation, and she's recognized as India's leading child rights activist of international reputation. She has several achievements, and some of them are based on the outstanding contribution towards elimination of child labor and protection of children's right to education. One of them is recipient of the prestigious Ramon Magsaysay Award in 2003 for community leadership, and the Padma Shri Award in 1998 by the Government of India. Believing in the principle that no child must work and every child must attend full-time formal day school as a non-negotiable, she spearheaded a social revolution which was the main driving force responsible for drawing over 10 lakhs children in the age group of 5 to 14 years. They have been withdrawn from child labor. That's a pretty huge achievement. She has also been successful in stopping about 20,000 child marriages and ensuring that all these children have been admitted into government schools through MVF, that is the MV Foundation. Every child is tracked until they finish 10th grade. She pioneered the program for mainstreaming children to schools through residential bridge courses. About 1,500 villages where MV Foundation has intervened, they have achieved a retention of 99% of all children in schools up till 10th class. She headed the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, NCPCR, as the first chairperson who held that position for 2 consecutive terms, that is from 2007 till 2013. In this capacity, she addressed issues concerning violation of children's rights in relation to child labor and child trafficking, rights of children in areas of civil unrest, children's right to education, juvenile justice system, corporal punishment, child abuse and violence on children, child malnutrition, and so on and so forth. So it's a huge area of work, extremely difficult, quite courageous of ma'am and quite consistent of ma'am to be working in this area and still worrying about so many future citizens, about their future, about their safety, about their rights. and about their well-being. So we're extremely proud today, this evening, to have ma'am with us. Without much ado, what I will now do is, I will request Professor Shantha Sinha to start her talk. Ma'am, welcome once again, and please start your talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sudhakar Rao garu, and also Professor R. Prasad, who is here today. Indeed, it is an honor to be talking to ICFAI and your faculty and students. In fact, as you mentioned, I have had a long association with ICFAI, and the honor that you bestowed on me is something that I cherish even today. So thanks a lot for this opportunity. And also, I think this is a very important topic, as we had earlier discussed in an informal manner. Normally, you don't find schools of management discussing children, discussing their rights, discussing what has happened to them. Usually, that is out of the purview of management issues. But I'm sure that your young minds who are listening to me are equally charged as I am, even if I'm not young, to understand what is happening to children, and also to see how there is a link between well-being of children and India's democracy. That becomes all the more important now because of what has happened during the lockdown and pandemic, where schools were closed. And I'll be talking about it to bring to your knowledge on the disaster that has happened to children due to pandemic. Now, before I begin, I will just bring up what children's rights are. I'll quickly enumerate what the rights are. Then I will enumerate what happened to children during pandemic. Then I will go into what the state, what the innovations were on the ground during that time, and what the government could have done. I'll do 5 minutes for each, and then perhaps we can open up for discussion. First of all, I think children's rights, may I say any rights, more specifically children's rights, are guided by three important principles. The first principle is that of equality. When we're talking about rights, it has to be talking about equality. If it is not equally applicable, then that is not a right. For example, if there is a school and if the rich have their international baccalaureate in a different kind of a school, and the poor are in schools that are not endowed well, where there's no water, there are no teachers, then certainly that's not enjoying a right. Then the second aspect of the right is indeed universality. It is applicable to all, rich and poor. You know, you can't say this is a right for some and not right for some. If it is a right, say for example, freedom of speech. You can't say the freedom of speech is only for some categories and not for some categories. It has to be applicable to all. There's a principle of universality, there's a principle of equality when we talk about rights. The third principle is the principle of social justice, which is very important in the context of India. Especially if you look at equality, even if one has to access the entitlements, cannot because of historical reasons, because of poverty reasons, because of caste reasons. So there has to be affirmative action. This affirmative action is in the realm of social justice, which means that unless you make certain special provisions, which could be reservations, which could be cash transfers, which could be special hostels, which could be special schools, you know, all that will have to be provided for such children who are not able to even come into the race for equality. They have been, so these three, the fourth and the last is that all this has to be provided for by the state. It's not NGOs that will provide equality, universality, and social justice. It's not ICFAI that can provide all this. It is a state duty and a state obligation. So when these obligations fail, then you find children being pushed into child labor. When all children don't go to school, and when the state fails in its duty to send children to school, then you will find that there is child labor. When there is not enough meal in the house, when there is hunger hunger in the house, then it is a responsibility of the state to provide for food. If they do not provide for food, then children are pushed into child labor. I'm saying this because there is a large argument that there is child labor because of poverty. Children are pushed into work because there is no food at home, because they are poor. But as far as child poverty is concerned, it is linked to state's incapacity, sometimes state's deficit, sometimes state complacency in providing for all these services. Children cannot become duty bearers. Children cannot become providers of resources for the family. Children are an entirely different category. They cannot play the roles of adults. If they are not enjoying their rights, it is the duty of the state to protect them and to protect their rights. I think this has to be made very, very clear. It is, again, we have to contest the idea of poverty causes child labor. It is their right, and it is what causes child labor is an absence of state provisioning for children. Not only that, it is also an absence of a societal shock and outrage that children are working. They're both, you know. Uh, Nobody is shocked that a child is out of school. Every day when I travel, I look at the road, and I look at the road, and sometimes I find that there are children, street children going around. I find sometimes children are in a chai shop, you know, but they are so invisible that you don't even see. But I'm working on children every day. So I see children every day. So this unseeing of children is a cause of child labor. Societal a lack of shock and outrage, and also the unseeing of children. I think it's so important that we keep, or otherwise turning your head on the other side, saying that it's not my matter, I can't do anything. Maybe I feel guilty, or maybe I feel also uh, somewhere thinking that, look, at least God has been kind to me. I must have done something good in some janma that I'm not like a street child. So, but it is so important to see that a child, labor is a lack of societal concern, and also lack of state response to children. So that is the second thing. In the last 10 decades, we made a lot of strides in children's education. The Right to Education Act was passed, and the enrollment figures went up. And in fact, it was moving in an exponential rate, where even girls would catch up with boys and their peers. And in some places, girls were doing better. The rate of education retention of girls was doing even better than boys. So there was huge gains that were made in the last decade. One is due to the Right to Education Act. Also, in terms of child labor, there were huge gains made, where there was a drastic reduction of child labor. That goes together. If there are more children in school, then there is a reduction of child labor, obviously. So there was a reduction, a drastic reduction. In a way, schools, the culture of the villages also began to change. There were, in fact, the poor parents were no longer saying children have to work. Poor parents began to say that, look, which is the next college my daughter can go to? Which is the next school she can apply for? What is the next course I can put in? So they stopped talking about marriage and dowry and locking up her mobility, or even about the boys. They wanted to know where do I admit him? So they imagined a new life for themselves and for their family. And you find that the statistics are not quote, but there was a phenomenal increase in enrollment of children and abolition of child labor. And what had happened during COVID was something that reversed all the gains that were made. I think that is very important, to the levels that we don't have statistics. Nobody has done a survey of how disastrous the consequences of closure of schools were. But then small little surveys, or my own field visits, my own talking to children, it has been very clear that there has been an exponential growth in child labor. That one began to understand the importance of schools for children of the poor. Uh, it was more important for them because it was a space not only for education, but it was also a space of safety for children, to keep them away from work. It was a space for safety of girls, to keep them away from getting married. Because when there was a norm that says that she has to get married early, the girl could stand her ground, exercise agency, and say that I will not get married. I have to complete 10th class. I have to complete 12th class. I want to study. And she had a goal that she can look forward to. That was no longer there. And there was a loss of livelihood. You know about certain schemes of the government were not implemented at all. And there was no work for the adult or for the, women or men. And there was not enough food reserves at home. That is when children and the entire families were pushed to work. And if only there were schools, this would not have happened. There was a closure of schools also meant closure of midday meal program. And an alternate access to meals was not there. So you see, there was hunger, there was uncertainty, there was anxiety of children about their future. There was also increase in child labor, increase in child marriage, and a huge disappointment that they didn't know what their future is going to be. So that was the situation during COVID. Now let's talk about, and that was for 2 full years, the situation in the state. 2 full years of loss of education. It is in this context the state could have done a lot for children. It need not have been a helpless government. It could have found out what was happening to the children, because under all disasters, ecological disasters, civil war disasters, any kind of unrest disasters, natural calamities, the worst affected our children. This is very well founded. So immediately the government should have found out, look, these are the weakest. What must we do for them? How do we see that they're not hungry? How do we see that they are safe? How do we see that they're protected and don't join child labor or child marriage, get married? This discussion was not there at all. For 2 years, there was full silence, and you didn't see any noise about children and their rights during COVID. It was after many of them started making a noise, the government had to sort of also reopen the schools. But the conditions in which the schools were reopened were just hopeless. In some schools, I'm sorry, I've not put together the photographs, but you'll find in some schools, forests began to grow. The bushes were around. There was no water. Nobody cared for 2 years of dilapidated, uncared for buildings. You of course know that even buildings breathe. If it is not occupied, even the poshest building crumbles. So a school building is not really a public school building. A government school building is not necessarily the poshest building in the world. And they had crumbled, and some stole away the doors, some stole the windows. There were no furniture, nothing. During COVID, it was not maintained. Post-COVID, the situation is even worse. And children had to come back to schools. There was a loss of learning. If there was no learning for 2 full years, children cannot remember, and you can't say that you can take them from where they left. To give you an example, if a child was in class 3, he automatically was in class 5 after 2 years of COVID. So he's not gone through class 4, he's not gone through entire class 5. So there has been this huge learning loss. And there was no scheme, even now there is no scheme or program to remedy this learning loss of children. Neither the government nor the school teachers have any clue to how to address this situation. So let me come to the final part of it, on what can be done. I think for all this, the solutions have to be decentralized. at the level of Gram Panchayat. Because it is there, children are not numbers. They're not statistics. They're not percentages. Children are real. They have a name, they have a face, they're real lives. And for Gram Panchayat, they have to track each child and plan for each child. They're not all uniform. All third class children are not the same. Some have been hungry, some have not been healthy, some have gone on migration, some have got married. So, you will have to plan for each child. So a centralized policy has to be where it says we delegate our authority to Gram Panchayat. Centralized management of schools is totally impractical. And during COVID, there were many innovations where they have shown how decentralized planning was done, tracking of children were done through many NGOs. They involved the Gram Panchayats, they ran village level centers. They did maintain the rhythm of learning. What the government came up was online. And we all know that this was such a failed program, the online program. These poor children didn't have smartphones, they didn't have electricity, they had no internet, and nobody to facilitate them on what is happening. It was totally unworkable. That solution even now is unworkable, but that is the only imagination the government had on what to do with children and their loss of learning. So having said this, I just have to conclude. Like I said, what a right is, how children in school was doing so well, and if children didn't go to school, it was an increase in child labor, that this had aggravated, exacerbated the predicament of children. It went even worse, and decentralized solution is the best way to handle this. So you may now start interventions.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much. I feel so happy for a reason that you have given us a great introduction into the world of children. The world of children is so interesting, and India, endowed with so many children, largest population of children in this country among the world, is not having solutions how to deal with the learning crisis and when the disaster struck. It is very unfortunate that as a society, I am a member of the society, and I feel that we have largely done that, what is called unseeing of the child. There was no shock to me. There was no outrage that I expressed. What would have happened to the children? I have probably worried about my own children, but I have not worried about the large number of children of poor parents. There was no work, there was lockdown, there was no livelihood, therefore there was no food. So they were pushed to work, and all of them were pushed into the work, including the children, therefore child labor. Ma'am, thank you very much for this eye-opening canvas that you have shared with us. Many times we are worried about the issues that we grapple with in terms of the corporate life, in terms of the balance sheets and the P&L, in terms of the people management, technology, and various other things that are easily seen and tracked by the gift of technology sometimes, and gift of the knowing certain things. But this particular aspect is something which we all as a society miss. As an important ingredient of the society, at least this is an opportunity for us to learn, understand, and identify what measures can be taken up by private people, individuals, groups, and NGOs also. And we are one of them to actually initiate some kind of action whenever there is a necessity, and constantly have a mindset of seeing the problem, seeing the children, and probably recognizing the problem that children go through. Thank you very much, ma'am, also for explaining what are rights and what are the fundamental aspects of principles of rights and the universality, equality, and accessibility. All these fundamental definitions of right have actually not been realized, especially focusing on children's right. The moment there is a crisis, the least priority, as in the case of pandemic, has gone to children. I think the priorities have been elsewhere. Governments have been actually dithering. They were not knowing what to do. Schools were not knowing what to do because there was a diktat to close the schools. Learning crisis. The first casualty of pandemic has been the learning crisis, and the learning habit has affected so much that even after coming back to school very recently, many people are facing variety of problems. Those problems which are written about in newspapers that are English in urban areas is what we know. But as you have explained, there are multiple matching problems which are not written about. And good NGOs like you and your own cause, people with you, are visiting and understanding how exponentially the children have been pushed into child labor because of pandemic. Thank you very much for this introduction, ma'am. And based on this, I want to also share with you that there are lots of questions from the participants. All the participants have keyed in their questions at the time of registration, and we have taken those questions and clustered into different buckets. And so I will now request Professor Prasad to initiate the first cluster of questions. And with this, we would have actually unraveled many questions with your response to those questions with details on some of these aspects which you touched upon in the opening remarks. And we have 4 such buckets. We'll try and see how much we can cover in the next 40 minutes or 35 minutes from here. Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much. And Professor Prasad, please initiate the Q&A.
Thank you, Professor Sudhakar. Ma'am, it is a stark picture that you painted when you looked at student moving from class 3 to class 5. And I think all of us have children at home in one fashion or the other. And we just can't imagine a situation where, of course, we had at least what you call the fig leaf of the online education system. But in their case, we can understand the kind of psychological trauma that they go through when they suddenly find that they have to start attending class 5. So I think that puts the whole thing into perspective, given the situation that they are going to school. And then you also looked at the situation where a lot of people have lost out. And I think here, as people from management, we have interest because you painted the picture of an upturn when a lot of parents started, wanting their children to go. And so that was an upturn. The economy was in an upturn. There were a lot of dreams. And then you had the downturn, which COVID caused. And this happens across the board. And I think the message there is that we were least prepared. Whether it was intentional or whether it happened, we don't know. But I hope that at least next time around it doesn't happen that way, and God forbid it doesn't happen again next time. The first question in this cluster, ma'am, is about your journey. You would have faced a lot of challenges looking at an issue like this, where things are taken for granted. You see that all around. That is what you were mentioning as you don't see that this is happening around you. So if that is a kind of situation that society is in, then you would have faced quite a number of challenges. Can you throw some insight, some something that we can understand in your journey?
Thank you. I think that's a good question, and I'll not make it personal, but I'll try to conceptualize the challenges. First challenge was the fact that nobody, neither, as I told you, neither the rich nor the poor thought that children had to be in school. That there was an absence of social norm in favor of poor children going to school. I think that was a huge challenge. When we went to meet, say, a secretary, an IS officer, or a politician, they said, why? I mean, they're poor. They have to work. That was the thing. When we met the poorest of parents, she also said, we don't work, how are we going to survive? So uniformly, there was a social norm that was against children and their rights. That was a huge challenge. So what our program was doing is to change the social norm, to make people say the right thing, to change the script. And that we worked a lot to get, and there we believe that in every person there is a moral space, and we appeal to the moral space. And we say that, do you think it is fair for a child to work? Do you think it is justice for a child to be exploited? Don't you think we should do something about it? So the only way to combat an absence of norm is in creating moral spaces and getting, especially the local youth from the Dalit and the BC communities, the Adivasis, who were school children, who completed 10th class. They understood the argument of injustice that we were making. They understood the argument of unfairness for being out of school. And so we started creating moral spaces in the village among school teachers, among bureaucrats, among politicians, who all said it's very unfair for a child to be out. That was the important challenge. So in a way, that helped us combat the poverty argument. They are poor, so they should work. It's such an obvious thing to say. So we said it is not poverty that causes child labor, it is poverty argument that causes child labor. Stop arguing. Talk about rights of children. You know, whether they're poor or not, they have to be in school. And it is, as I told you, a state responsibility. So that I think, and then of course, all policies were wrong. I'll stop here because maybe those questions will come. The legal framework, the policy framework was totally against children. And we had to change it. Maybe those questions will come. I don't want to take too much time answering questions.
Thank you, ma'am. I think, the central point that you have communicated is that it is, sort of development and communication programs where you have influenced the primary stakeholders and you have created the moral space to to counter the norms, the social norms which are in progress. I think that is the central point that came out. And of course, you did touch upon the fact that there are, the legal framework is missing. Ma'am, the next question is about, the situation around us across the globe when you compare it with India. And ILO says that child labor globally has increased from about 152 million to about in 2016 to about 160 million in 2020. So how does this compare to what's happening in India? And what are other governments doing when faced with a similar situation? And maybe a somewhat similar context in terms of, a government like in India. So is there anything that we can learn from what others have done during this?
I must say that globally, it has been the same, but in different degrees. I am part of a global network which is combined with Western societies as well as our kinds of societies. All of them failed their children. All of them failed their children, and we all called it an education emergency. But the Western societies quickly recovered because they didn't have to grapple with the issue of hunger and poverty. And they had sturdier child protection systems. If in times of, in normal times, if you have a system, then in an emergency time, it will work. In countries like ours, the systems weren't there in the normal time also. They were just half-hearted systems. So they collapsed during pandemic. I think that is what had happened. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say is West also faced similar crisis, but they recovered faster. They also went through the whole debate on online classes, the debate on loss of learning, everything, just as we did. But they recovered fast because their system was sturdier. But in our country, there was no system. There's no question of it becoming sturdier during, I'm not saying no system at all, but no fully functional system. So when there is a pandemic, there's a total collapse of the system. That I think has happened when you compare it to globally.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. The next question, ma'am, is about the way the structure of the Indian society is so much of child labor in agriculture. They say globally. Is this true in India? They also say that about 72% of child labor comes from family-based child labor, which perhaps may be also correlated to agriculture. Is there anything specific about India in this dimension of agriculture and
Absolutely, you're right. Most children work in the informal sector, in family-based units, and also in agriculture. The laws for a long time till 2016 did not cover agricultural labor. So agricultural labor was not banned at all. It was not seen as hazardous. It was acceptable for children to be going as cattle herds or shepherds or working in the farms. There were thousands of girls working on cotton farms, on brick kilns, construction work, but they were not, especially in agriculture. It was not regarded as child labor at all. It was only in 2016 when there was an amendment to the Child Labor Act, all forms of child labor were defined as child labor. And here also they made an exception in the Act that if the child works for the family before and after school hours, it is okay. All of us went against that kind of a provision of working in the family, that because many of the poor families, at least from again castes that were traditional artisan communities, children when they work before and after hours, it's exploited labor, and it compromises their participation in school, and soon they drop out of schools to join the family in their traditional work. The government said because these traditional areas should survive, children should help the families. We said no, children should have other options. The possibilities, the choices, the opportunities your child, my child has, poor children should also have. And maybe those children don't want to be in the traditional occupations. Then that would reinforce caste hierarchies. There has to be a break in the caste system also. That can happen only through a universal education. So we argued for that, but even now, the law on child labor continues to have children work before and after school hours and during vacations.
Thank you, ma'am, for throwing light on what is happening with a majority of this issue, and how society is continuing to look at that, and how the law continues to support that. The next question, ma'am, is about the education system. I mean, of course, we have the new education policy which is coming up. But if we, there is a particular comment which has come from one of the participants who happens to be in education. So what he says is the formalized version of education in India today, particularly at the elementary and primary stages, is a recipe for disaster. So how do we look at it, keeping in view child labor? I mean, what sort of education system is more adaptable to get them to the outcomes that you desire?
Actually, I would say that every child wants to be in school. So the problem is not at the end of the child or the family. The problem is at the end of the system. How prepared it is to reach out to children of the poor and the first generation learners. You see, these are families that never had even seen a paper and a pencil in there for thousand years. They have been illiterate. There's something called a culture of literacy that has been denied to them through history. That I think the schools have not been able to understand. They think these children, their expectations of these children are the same as their expectation of our children who know how to pack a school bag. The parents, like, I have to give you an example. Like my grandchildren, they're in classes 3 and 5. The parents spend 1 hour in the morning packing their school bag and sending them to school, so they know how to send a child to school, and if there is a problem, how to negotiate with the school. These parents do not know how to pack a school bag. They don't. In fact, 1 hour my daughter and son-in-law spend after children have sent to school, they take a rest for half an hour. That is how much that energy that goes in doing this. You should realize that is something illiterate parents do not know. It's a skill that they do not have. Government must understand that they do not have the skill. They should not punish the children for not getting a book, for not buying the right book, for not for taking leave on a festival. It's a totally different culture. So you have to be sensitive to it, and I think the schools have to learn to respect the poor and be sensitive to them. Then there will be total transformation.
I think what you're mentioning is that the context is very different for the kind of students who come from there.
Right.
And the behavioral issues which arise out of that very different context have not, that kind of sensitization needs to be done for the
Yeah.
schools, for them to
Right.
do better on what they're doing with the same
Correct.
students.
Right. And they must appreciate they also have their own sets of knowledge and take it from there. They're not empty spaces coming into your school. They also have their own sets of knowledge, appreciate it and take it forward.
Absolutely, ma'am. I'm reminded of that Hindi movie, where the teacher, stammers, but the entire set of students are those who are coming from some similar background where they labor out.
Yeah. That is true. That is true. Right. That was a very nice.
One more question in this cluster, ma'am. This is a comment which has come from a person senior in handling child labor. So what he says is that many factory-based occupations and processes have been converted to home-based businesses to take advantage of the Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Amendment 2016. Now, how does one tackle this?
They have to re-amend the constitution and ban children working even in factories. It's simply unacceptable. On the other hand, they should also have a vigilance groups in the villages. They should have watchdogs. Like there are human rights watch. There has to be children's rights watch. That is what we have done in our villages. There are about 1,200 villages where every child is in school. In fact, the area where ICFAI is located was one of our areas where we worked. There's no child who's working. If there is, please let me know in those areas. So, there has to be a watch. In many of these areas, when children are working, migrant labor children from Odisha come and work. Quickly, there is a community group that tells them, look, we fought to make our village child labor free. Send your child to school. So I think there is need for a child rights watch. And it's possible. It is easy and it is possible.
So there are ways in which these can be done, and I'm sure somewhere
absolutely,
along.
Absolutely. And the Gram Panchayat has a huge role in tracking every child. Once a month, this must come on their agenda. We had programs where Gram Panchayats had child rights compulsorily on their agenda. And there was once a girl who was trafficked to Pune. And the Gram Panchayat found out she was in the red light area. So they contacted the labor department, the police department across to Pune also, brought her back. Then the girl had HIV and AIDS. So the panchayats again worked to rescue her, give her ART treatment. She survived for 5 years after that and she passed away, but at least she had 5 years of love after that because of Gram Panchayat's action. So tracking every child.
Absolutely. I think you've also reinforced what you said earlier about decentralization and what Gram Panchayats can do from these kind of anecdotal experiences.
Absolutely. At least now the 15th Finance Commission has even the 14th, but even now in the 15th, devolved funds directly to Gram Panchayats. So there has to be management institutions like yours to sit with the Gram Panchayats to make proposals. Right now, the focus is also on water, sanitation and hygiene. But there has to be somebody to facilitate them to write a proposal to reach the 15th Finance Commission, and it bypasses the district collector, bypasses the state government. Panchayats now can make direct proposals for schools, for hygiene, for health, but somebody has to take on the responsibility. It's a very technical intervention. I think we have to do that.
And I think that also adds an idea and an opportunity for management students who want to get into social entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. I mean, there is a criticism of this bypassing state government and that it's over centralization and diluting federal principles. But then we can convert this disadvantage to an advantage and empower Gram Panchayats to access resources.
Thank you, ma'am. We come to the end of this cluster. I hand it back to Professor Sudhakar now.
Oh, that
Thank
was
you.
like answering PhD Viva questions.
Thank you, ma'am. We have to learn a lot. What's happening over the last few minutes is the detailing, not just the detailing, the beauty of this discussion, according to me, is that you are targeting those arguments to say poverty argument is the problem, not poverty in itself. I mean, that's a very, very big takeaway of how to change our mindset in viewing this problem itself. The second argument is the centralization argument. Centralization of policy, centralization of execution will not lead us anywhere. And the lack of innovation when there was a crisis and a disaster, hopefully we learn from all these important aspects. These social norms, actually, social norms or arguments that come out of these social norms is something that you are attacking. That is very, very interesting for me. I will just take a couple of questions in this cluster so that it actually strengthens the line of approach that you are taking. I'm purposefully taking this question again, although you have addressed it. One of the participants has asked that in the previous generation, the children of previous they take traditional occupations. That's the question, actually. Father's occupation, children taking up. Some of the families follow this. So how do you call this child labor now? I mean, the question is as simple as that. So I think here is a lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah, please, ma'am, respond.
It's an excellent question, whoever has asked it. I look at it from the angle of equality and right to equality, and that these children must have the same equal choices that other children have. And they can choose to become, say, whatever their parents did after 18 years of age. But until 18 years of age, they must be shown a world and a web of interaction where they can make a choice of where they would like to go. That's very, very important. And if there has been a mobility in the country today, it is because they broke away from the traditional, occupations. I'll just give you one anecdote. I was with the tribal students in Khammam, right? They had all passed 10th class with great difficulty, great untold conditions of, living in hostels, ashram shalas, and everything. So, but then I was praising them for their culture, for their skills, that they can identify some 50 varieties of birds, that they have so much knowledge and everything. Those boys told me, if you like us so much, you take away our culture, you take away our knowledge, you give what you have to us. We want a break from this. So I think we don't kind of consult them enough to find out what they want. We romanticize tradition and culture. We should not do that. It's very important that we don't romanticize tradition and culture. All of us had in the past our own forefathers who were in a different occupation. Switch it off. Yeah, who had different occupations. All of us had. But then we broke. That is why I'm able to sit with you and talk. Otherwise, I would have been the granddaughter of a priest. Or what value is that to me?
Great. I think that's actually a deep observation based on the anecdote that you've given, is that we tend to romanticize tradition and culture. And if we actually not pursue the traditional occupations, we break away, we show them more opportunities, let them choose. The equality of opportunity to choose one's career is a very, very important right that one can give. Probably after 18 years of age, they can choose whatever they like to. But this trap of getting into traditional occupations is not only going to strengthen the caste system, but it is also going to breed incompetence, loss of employment, loss of growth, and there's no future for them in most of the cases. So I think that's a pretty poignant point. Ma'am, the second question, you have already touched upon it. What it summarizes is that agriculture actually takes children away from schools. How do we avoid this?
No, I'll give you an example. It is anecdotal. When we withdrew all children from work, again around Shankarpalli area we worked, they were completely, they were growing rice, they were growing bantipulu, no marigold, they were growing all vegetables for the Hyderabad city, and the work was done by children only. You know, when we removed the children from work, the demand for women workers went up, and they were working at say 9 rupees a day. Because there were no girls available in the labor market, their wages went up to 60 rupees a day. Now, of course, it is 400 rupees a day. But when we go, so you know, when you withdraw children from work, it in fact increases the wage rate for adults. And even boys, when we withdrew, you know, the wages went up. And then men started demanding so much that tractors came. So in a way, you will find technology is also, at least the traditional cultures, traditional societies, technological change happens with labor shortage or when labor becomes expensive. That we could see right in front of us, the theory where you have dishwashers, mixies, you know, all of them, where you don't have domestic labor available, technology takes its place. And so to see, the point that is one is making is, it is not inevitable that children must work in agriculture. When they stop working, it could very well improve the quality of life, and other forms of production will replace children. Other modes of production will replace children.
Okay, essentially what you're saying, ma'am, is technology and other modes of production will take over, and we will have to essentially withdraw children from agriculture. It has its own benefits, and one of the methods to avoid this could be deployment of technology wherever possible.
Yeah. They will do it automatically. You don't have to. Then there will be a demand for skills.
Yeah.
Then there will be a demand for colleges that will effectively impart skills.
Man, it's squarely back on colleges now. Yes, there will be a demand for imparting skills, and see such long ramifications of action with respect to withdrawing children from agriculture and such labor. Fantastic, ma'am. That's a very good.
I'd like to just say, any layer of oppression, if you remove it, it in fact unleashes productive power, and also opens up the economy. When the layers of oppression was removed after the British left, look at the rapid changes that have been made in the country after independence. So removing oppression is creating wealth.
Fantastic. Removing oppression is creating wealth. Wonderful. Ma'am, the next question is about the midday meals that the government provides, and we all talk about it. And some of the parents insist that they be sent back after the meals to meet their livelihood needs. So basically, have the meal and come back and work. That's what parents insist. So the policy on the ground is not effective for education, though it is for nutrition. Nutrition tick boxes are ticked, probably, but not in terms of education. How do we tackle this issue, ma'am?
It's good enough that at least nutrition is being taken care of. Right to food is an equally important right, but then that does not mean you compromise on right to education. One will have to continuously work for right to education. One can't fault right to food because children have stopped going to school. In fact, the statistics show that attendance of children in school increases with right to food.
Fantastic. It is interconnected in that way. Yeah. The next question is about women in urban slums often make their children work as domestic help. They feel that by educating them, their challenges will increase. Challenges of society, challenges of handling the children probably will increase, or economic challenges.
No, I think it is. Yeah, please continue.
Yeah. How do we bring change in these mindsets of thinking that, there will be challenges that will go up when we educate them, especially the focus is on women in urban slums?
I think I turn the argument upside down. Children are working in homes because they're a source of cheap labor. and they can be forced to work for long hours. It's more the employer's need that children are working rather than the need of a poor family. So we must stop thinking we are doing a favor to children by employing them. In fact, we are exploiting the child, denying the child a right to education. You may try to put that child to school and say, I tried it and it still didn't happen. You're no expert at that. Come to people like us, we'll show you how to send a child to school.
Yeah. So what you're saying is foundation like yours will definitely create mechanisms and systems and solutions of how we can send the children back to school. But then, yes, we need to stop exploiting them. The root causes is cheap labor. The root cause is non-complicated, long hours of working.
The root cause is us.
The root cause is us.
We are the cause. Yeah, we are the cause. And if you're, the best thing to do is call 1098 child line, and they will take over to rescue the child.
Fantastic. So we call 1098 and they'll respond and take over.
Yeah, they'll respond, they'll take over. And you must have the courage to say that, that you can still be anonymous, but I would appreciate it if you have the courage to say, I made the call.
Okay. Okay. Nice. I think that's a very nice suggestion. And I think most of us should be able to note that down and practice wherever we see such thing happening. Fantastic, ma'am. There is one question that has come up in the chat box, and after this, I'll hand it over back to Professor Prasad. I read it out verbatim. Neoliberal pressures have created or clearly evolved to present individual responsibility as a vital path towards progress. Children have been unwittingly trapped into this vicious cycle, presenting learning as the sole responsibility of the child. Could we be any more short-sighted?
I agree entirely with the statement. I think there is less investment in institutions, structures and processes, and more in something like cash transfers, doling out money. I'm not against it, but if you don't correspondingly build institutions, it is wasting a lot of resources.
Correct. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. I'll request Professor Prasad to take the next cluster, and after that, I'll come back and wrap it up. We are at 8:33. Yeah. We are at 8:33. We'll take a few more minutes, and we'll try and.
Yeah, please. I'll be happy.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Professor Prasad.
Yeah, sure. Ma'am, this is about, you did mention about the child line. So there's some specific action. I also, feel that, many of those we did talk about the urban slum woman, but I think we also need to talk about the person who's employing the urban slum woman and who also has equal responsibility there. Now, coming to specific measures, the question is, suppose you see a child labor practice, like you mentioned Shankarpalli, you mentioned agricultural. What are the sequence of steps that you would take in order to see that you reach the outcome that you want? That means get the children to school and ensure that the farmers have their own means to run their agriculture. What do you actually do?
This is totally, it deserves 3 hours, the answer, but I'll be 3 minutes, not even 3 minutes. Basically, what we actually do is contact everyone in the village. As I told you, to find out about how many children are working and out of school, how many children are in school, and then create a youth power. We work a lot with local youth, and I feel that every generation has local youth who are charged and who want to change the society. Sometimes you get some people who are old, like, think very cynically about the youth. But I've worked for the last 50 years, and I've seen that there are generations of youth whom we have worked with who are mad, who are obsessed, who want to sacrifice and do change. So we depend on these mad people to partner with us, to contact parents, and then sometimes go to a parent at least 100 times, at least 1,000 times, till the parent is convinced that we mean to actually send their children to school. So So that is that. Then we also do a lot of institution building. We formed with government school teachers, Balakarmika Vimochana Vedika. About 3,000 teachers were part of it, and they were taught that their responsibility is for both children out of school and in school, not just for children who come to school, Then we formed a forum for child rights protection forum. So we do a lot of local institution building that even when we are not there, they continue with the program to watch that children do not work. So this is just to give. And finally, we are there to change the hearts and minds of people. Say if the employer was very difficult, we don't confront him and say you are upper caste, I am lower caste, and therefore you have done this. We again appeal to his moral space, and we in fact celebrate when he leaves the child to school. We do a Vidyadhan ceremony where the employer gives us books and bag and say, I sponsor your education, and the boy thanks the employer eventually. So a lot of winning over people without insulting and humiliating them, saying that we are not against you as an individual, but we are against what you think. And we know that you're as good as I am. I don't have a monopoly of goodness. So we've reached out to Maoists, we've reached out to thugs, we've reached out to dacoits. They have all been changed because we trusted them and their sense of morality.
I think this is a very wonderful illustration of a purpose-driven, mission-oriented social organization, and I'm sure a lot of those who are in the audience, a lot of younger age group today are looking at beyond profit-making commercial ventures, and I think this will be of immense interest to them. And it's also extremely challenging. It's not like your normal corporate organization, because the intricacies involved in what you have said, and it's quite diverse, the range of effort. And I must appreciate you that, as a professor, because a typical Indian professor image is very different, but you are on the field and you're very active. And I think a lot of, what you therefore say has far more credibility than what gets just published in a paper.
Thank you so
much. Thank you, ma'am. I'll stop here for paucity of time. I'll hand it back to Prof. Sudhakar.
Yeah.
Ma'am, thank you very much. That was actually a very, very powerful story of execution that you've given. I'll come to that a little later, but it is actually occupying my mind because the way you approach the changing of the mindsets is very, very interesting and very effective as well, actually. One question I'll take, this is, what are the opportunities available? After listening to you, one of the participants has asked, what are the opportunities available for social entrepreneurship in this area, in this space?
I think right now, most of the support for our programs come from corporates, and every corporate house has a corporate social responsibility department. In fact, I think it would be good to get in touch with the CSR, because the traditional donors have shrunk a lot. They're usually foreign donors who had invested in the NGOs. With the current dispensation and strict FCRA rules, they have shifted to Africa, most of the donors. And now the donations are coming from corporate sector. So I think it would be good even for you, for ICFAI, to have a course on CSR and social entrepreneurship, on how they can partner to bring about change.
Fantastic. That's a nice suggestion, ma'am. We should definitely have a course on social entrepreneurship to be a participant in bringing about the change in the society to the extent possible. Fantastic. One last question is, what are your plans of MV Foundation and Professor Shantha Sinha to reduce child labor in the future? You have any targets and plans?
See, we have found a model. We have done a pilot. We've got 10 lakh children to school. So we don't want to keep repeating the model. We've influenced policies. Right to Education Act, we've influenced child labor policies. What we would like to do is give support to any other organization who want to do similar work, rather than directly implement, to handhold others to replicate our model. not directly implement, but replication is what we are looking for. And we are also looking for advocacy, the government, because as I told you, finally it is the government that has to provide for education. So collecting data, collecting information to make our plea sturdier, to say that we have to invest. So it is towards research and towards the support to other NGOs to take the program to scale. So this is where we are.
Fantastic, ma'am. We started with government and we ended with the other side of the government, where you will provide advocacy and make sure that there is affirmative action coming in all forms from government in order to eradicate, probably in order to reduce the child labor and make sure that many children are enrolled for education and actualize their rights, which are enshrined in the Constitution. Allow me to summarize, ma'am. We are now at 8:41. I'll take just 1.5 minutes. It's been a fantastic canvas that we have, with your help, looked at. And it's an eye-opener for me, for many others, and all of us from ICFAI are extremely happy that we have had this discussion today. And we hope these discussions continue, these realizations keep dawning, and we translate this realization into some kind of useful action on the ground. And you have given very clear plans and suggestions for institutions like us also. One is to launch a course on social entrepreneurship and make some difference. Come up with courses on skilling, because we can take children away from child labor, and therefore there will be requirement of skills to supplement and support the economy. And the third one is institutions like ICFAI and many others also will have to directly involve in intervening and helping the Gram Panchayats in writing the proposals to take advantage of what has been policied there with respect to sending the money directly to Gram Panchayats. So they don't know how to write proposals, and institutions can definitely help, and that will be their contribution if Gram Panchayats can fully take advantage of this new system. Ma'am, you started with the point that the lack of support or complacency or incapacity on behalf of government leads to poverty, and this poverty leads to child labor. It is not the poverty directly is the problem, but absence of action, absence of support from government. Second is absence of outrage or shock from society, people like us, that causes child labor, and it deepens the problem. And when the child doesn't go to school, obviously because of any reason, if the child doesn't go to school, reasons are many, then they go to child labor. I mean, that's a very simple way of identifying the root causes and what is the responsibility of various stakeholders that has been painted in this canvas extremely well. Children we need to read children as children cannot be carrying the responsibility and duties of the family. They cannot be the breadwinners. They cannot be the adults. They cannot be the money earners. I think they have their own rights, and this we need to realize and be very, very sensitive. Unseeing of children and unseeing of their rights is a major shame, probably in the civilized society like ours. I think we have to, there's a great deal of eye-opening that is required, and being very sensitive to this and contribute our might to stopping this or reducing child labor in the days to come. Although several policy-making changes have come, several strides and gains have been made in terms of education, in terms of enrollment ratios going up, girls doing very well, enrollment of girls and performance of girls in education is going up. Cultural change started happening. All these gains probably were reversed during the pandemic. Very, very unfortunate reality. The disastrous closure of schools has given rise to child labor. Very unfortunate issue. Importance of schools for children, especially for the children of poor people, is so important that it is only multiplying when such disasters strike. And we as a system, as government, we don't have enough safeguards or enough systems existing to readily spring into action. So that is a very, very important suggestion that you have given. There is also no discussion that we witnessed. Very unfortunately, there was no discussion about children during the pandemic. The priorities were very different for a variety of reasons, because pandemic comes once in a period of say 100 years, but the discussion not being there about children, everything else was discussed. And then the easiest thing that they thought was to close the schools, and that has created havoc on their learning ability, on their future. Even now when the schools are open, there are several difficulties, as you've identified. These difficulties are across the world. These difficulties are across regions like, say, rural, semi-urban, and even urban. But most affected and the worst affected is those underprivileged areas, children of parents who are poor. I think that is where the biggest focus should be. Decentralization of panchayats, as I mentioned earlier, is another very good solution that you have given. But what I'm amused about, ma'am, and I want to mention this, is that your own approach, your MV Foundation's approach and Professor Shantha Sinha's approach, which I am trying to conceptualize, is that you tap into the power of local youth. And as traditionally it has been seen that youth are wayward, they don't listen to anything, they don't show interest in this thing, in social cause and social change. But you have dealt with many villages and gram panchayats, and you have tapped into the power of local youth. This is a concept of design thinking. When you are trying to give a solution, you have identified the members of the same community or same team of village who can be leaders, and they are the carriers of the change. They give suggestions, they implement. And when you move away from that village back, say when you come back to Hyderabad, for example, the problem lies there. So they will be the watchdogs. They will be constantly looking at it, and it is their responsibility to actually take it further and reduce child labor and other problems. This is, in my view, a very, very simple and effective way of executing design thinking approach in bringing about social transformation. And that's where I salute you and congratulate you. Wish that more and more programs you bring about. You've been quite inspirational, ma'am. You're a fantastic journey. It's not just the awards, but I think the sensitivity with which you have spoken about all these matters and helped us understand is something which is great. And we once again are very, very thankful to you for doing this session with us. From the bottom of my heart, we thank you.
Thanks a lot. You've been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Prasad and Sudhakar. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to an end of this fantastic session. It could have gone and on for a few more hours, but I think we will catch up with ma'am a little later, and I'll share some of your questions with ma'am, and probably we'll seek her response whenever she is free subsequently on email. But we will come back and have a nice discussion on food. If food is right, there is no need for medicine. It is going to be a discussion with yet another leader, that is Dr. Khadar Wali, and he's going to talk to us on March 18th, Friday at 7:30 p.m. Do join us. Till then, do take care and keep reflecting on some of these interesting points that Professor Shantha Sinha has mentioned. Unseeing of child's problems and our own commitment to social transformation. It could be small, but it will be very effective. On this happy note, I take leave from you and wish you all the best, and see you next Friday.